Very much welcome to another Flash Friday. My name is Ginsel of Holland FinTech, and I'm happy to take you through the news and latest developments in the fintech space again this week. Really looking forward to this discussion today. With me today, well, not really in the studio, but of course in his own studio, is Gijs Boudewijn of the Dutch Payment Association. Gijs, welcome very much to the show this morning.
Good morning.
Very nice to have you here. I think it's a really exciting time. I'm basically also beginning to speak almost like the reporters on CNN talking about the US elections, and basically keep the game going like it's a football game where every minute gets scored, even though it's hardly heading anywhere. But the race is really tight, so it's an exciting time. It's really fun to sort of follow what's going on there. Really curious how it'll turn out in the end. But it almost makes us, we could basically talk about the payment space as it's actually just as exciting, isn't it, Gijs?
Yeah, well, you could say that the gap between, let's say, the incumbents and the fintechs is also closing, like it's closing in the US in the elections. So.
That's a nice comparison.
Yeah.
So cool. So could you maybe tell a little bit? You work at the Dutch Payment Association as a vice director, vice president. What's the right term for that? The deputy general manager. Sorry, I see.
Right.
So what do you do with the Dutch Payment Association exactly?
So basically, we represent let's say the supply side of the payments industry in the Netherlands, which means the banks, credit institutions, that is, payment institutions, and also e-money institutions. We have a sort of a neutral governance. We're not a lobbying club, so we look at the collective space of payments, helping to facilitate efficient and reliable and secure payments in the Netherlands. We operate in the collective space of payments. So personally, I mainly work in the Brussels arena, representing the Dutch community, for instance, at the European Banking Federation, talking to the European Commission and stuff like that.
Okay, and so I guess it's quite a busy time, because I think there's a good spotlight from the policymakers on fintech these days, with digital finance plans from the EU, as well as all kinds of related regulations that are coming out. What are you focused on mostly nowadays?
Well, as you indeed say, Don, on the 24th of September, the European Commission released quite a broad package, comprising also a new retail payments strategy, but also what we call the MiCA. It's a markets in crypto assets directive proposal, something on operational resilience and the digital finance strategy. It's quite a broad package, which will go beyond finance, open data sharing, and beyond. EID, it's a very broad policy package, also driven, let's say, by the desire of the European institutions to guard European sovereignty a little bit more than we did in the past, as opposed to let's say, the American and the Chinese giants. So there's really a political backwind, if you will, for the European industry to create European, as the Commission's homegrown European solutions, also for payments. If you look at payments more specifically, there's all the money goes to instant payments, and being the promise of delivering a new infrastructure that on which a lot of innovation could take place, and that innovation should produce those homegrown European solutions that could compete with the non-European solutions of the international card schemes and, let's say, the Chinese giants. Well, let me stop there. So, but that's quite a broad package, which will keep us busy for the coming years.
Yeah, no, I can fully imagine, and I know indeed that Europe has quite an ambition there to govern the realm. But I think it's quite hard, because maybe the package actually takes too long to govern while the world is changing in the meanwhile. It's quite a challenge to keep it up to date, I think.
And the question, of course, is, I mean, some of it is regulatory, and I was on a webinar of the Italian colleagues with our annual payments conference, which is called Salone dei Pagamenti in good Italian.
Always sounds better when it's Italian.
So next year we will have the PSD2 review, and that's going to solve a lot of issues. And say, whoa, wait a minute. If you look at the Brussels machinery, how long it works and how long it takes. So the Commission said we may start a review by the end of 2021, and if you know the metrics in Brussels, that means that nowhere before 2025 there can be anything like PSD3, rather to 26 or something. So and that's also what the Commission said to us. They really count on the market, the dialogue between fintechs and banks to produce those results rather than rely on regulation, because that will come too late anyway. So they're really looking at the market initiatives and trying to be supportive and hope that the market will deliver the political goals.
I can fully imagine. I think indeed before the new legislation would come into place, we would actually be used to the existing situation to such an extent that also the changes will rather be a burden than actually changing what way we were working at it. And so I'm a bit curious also about your take. Are you also looking into the crypto package particularly? We've seen some news recently about some Dutch firms that were quite didn't really like the way that the Dutch central bank was looking into the registration duty that these crypto firms currently have. Are you active in this space to look at it?
Well, not really, because we're a payments association and crypto assets are not means of payment. So what we only look at is the digital euro, which is not a crypto asset, but just a digital euro. I think that's quite a misunderstanding that some believe that some think that the digital euro has been presented not only by the Dutch central bank, but also by the European Central Bank, together with a club of, let's say, the Japanese, the Canadian, and some other central banks. That concept is just a digital representation of what we now see as the banknote, which is an obligation of the central bank, which is something totally different than a Bitcoin, which is self-anchored and doesn't represent any inherent value. Yes and no. For now, we are not looking at crypto assets because that's more a securities thing, if you will. More interesting for us from the payments perspective is, of course, with the decline of cash as legal tender, the advent of the digital representation of that banknote and how should that work eventually is far more interesting. And the European Central Bank has just started a sort of market consultation with banks, but also other stakeholders, to see how the market looks at these initiatives of the digital euro, at the digital central bank issued money. There's still lots of questions to be solved there.
Yeah, because I think indeed for the end user, it's probably not that exciting that this is going to be followed up, because most people are dealing already with only digital euros, dollars, or anything beyond that. But I think on an infrastructure level, it could have quite an impact, right?
It could, but the presentations we had last week, at the European Banking Federation from the European Central Bank, because that's the start of that cycle they're doing. Their ambition is to have summer 2021 a project proposal at the Governing Council. What they told us to start a possible project for an MVP for the digital euro, but it's not intended to replace commercial bank money. And the question is, how much of it should you issue? What would be the function of it? And there's all sorts of exciting things you need to think about. So what would it look now? Today I have a wallet, a physical wallet, and of course I have it in my phone now, but I used to have a plastic card on the one end, which represents the commercial bank money. I do my debit card payment in commercial bank money, and if I want to pay cash, I take out the banknote and give it to the retailer. If you have a digital euro, you don't have that physical banknote anymore. So how would this bearer digital euro look like? So probably what they said, you would have a digital wallet which contains both commercial bank money and central bank money. But then you could ask the question, and I think that's what you alluded to. What's the point there? Why would I have two types of digital money in my digital wallet? What's the point?
Exactly, because I think in the end, I mean, also digital money from commercial banks is still also a claim on the central bank implicitly. So it's
because we have a deposit guarantee scheme, perhaps.
No, exactly, but it's quite interesting indeed. So I'm also curious, because they could have quite an impact on the let's say the infrastructure layer, and whether you are indeed circumventing current infrastructure needs. And I thought it was interesting from that perspective that there was a call in the US for some companies to actually say, why don't we actually give more payment companies direct access to the core payment rails, like the European Target 2. I think they were talking about the American variety of that and said, like, why don't we give much more parties access to that to create a more efficient payment ecosystem?
Yeah. Indeed, and but by the way, we should also realize that the reason why everybody is now, it's like the new, let's say the CBDC is the new blockchain. Our good friend Dave Birch would say probably. I mean, it's a hype because we used to, a couple of years it was blockchain, then it was instant payments, and now it's a CBDC. Oh wow! Everybody globally is infecting each other with this new CBDC virus. Also because, and that's what of course the central banks and also the ECB say, it's also a defensive move. If the central banks don't do it, large platforms like Facebook with Libra might do it. So this is also a political and a sovereignty thing.
Yeah.
That if the central banks don't do it themselves, very large market players might take that space, and that's from a financial stability perspective, a sovereignty perspective, monetary policy perspective. Is of course undesirable from a central bank's perspective.
Yeah, indeed. I think, and it's really funny to see indeed how they sort of all tumble over each other to sort of announce CBDC projects. Like for example, this week, the Bank of Australia was announcing that they were going into a project like that. Indeed, so we've seen all the central banks diving into this, and I do understand fully their appetite for it from the perspective of a defense. Indeed, as you mentioned it. Yeah. Quite interesting, I think. So one topic you also touched upon, I think, is sort of the increased use of digital space, right? So also Chris Skinner wrote a story about that last week about how frictionless commerce becomes actually really important as our payment behavior through the pandemic is changing towards more online, but also really being critical about every option that actually provides more. Let's say creates any friction in the process. And we actually saw, for example, they looked at the figures from a neobank in the US that offered both debit and credit cards, and they saw a big move from credit to debit transactions. Which I thought was quite interesting to see that for the US. Do you? I mean, you monitor also a lot of the, let's say, for more the Dutch space. What kind of payment transactions are especially being used? Do you also see similar movements here?
Well, let's not talk about payments in the US. I mean, we are so far ahead in Europe, ahead of the US, to be honest. They still use checks, for instance. But anyway, of course, what we've seen in the Eurozone, the Netherlands are front runner in debit card payments as opposed to cash payments at the point of sale. So we already had about, and today it's over 70% debit card payments versus less than 30% cash at the physical point of sale. And of course, the COVID-19 virus has speeded up that.
Because were these 2019 figures, or is this throughout 2020?
The end of 2019 was 68.32 from the top of my head, and of course it is now over that. I don't have the latest figures right now. There was a real dip, but it has bounced back a little bit, cash payments. But anyway, it has gone down quicker than the trend that was already there.
Yeah.
So we got an extra push downwards from the COVID-19 virus. Also because we, as banks, very early in the process of very early in the crisis, raised the contactless limits of debit card payments. And I think that over 85% of all debit card payments are now contactless, which is huge. And we see that across the globe, especially contactless is because of the virus, the preferred method of payment at the point of the physical point of sale. That is.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And so do you also look at, let's say, for example, if I would make a payment, I would basically either choose between the physical pass that I happen to have stuffed into my phone or use an Apple Wallet, for example, to make a payment. Do you also track the different uses there?
Well, to be honest, I wish we could, but of course we don't get figures from Apple. As a payments association, we would like to have a complete picture of the whole market, and we would love to have statistics from PayPal and Apple. Of course, we can't get those. So the only things that we really have reliable figures is ideal because that is bank owned. Is the debit cards that the banks provide us? Is the cash withdrawals that we get from Geldmaat, the joint venture of the banks, and some credit card data. But the other competing payment method, of course, for commercial reasons, will not divulge their figures. The only sort of reliable overview we have is what we have been doing with Thuiswinkel.org, so the home shopping organization, is have a monitor on the e-commerce payments, where you have this nice pie chart which we publish together with them each year. And there you see that the preferred payment method in the online environment in the Netherlands is ideal, with a 68% market share in the e-commerce space with
which is
cards.
a direct debit solution, right? So it's a
no, it's a credit transfer. It's not a direct debit.
Oh yeah, sorry, it's a credit transfer, but indeed it basically it works with your checking account, so there's no credit involved.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
And as a good second come credit cards, and of course credit cards are huge in the US or the UK and many most other markets. But in the Netherlands, well, it's already there has been there for 15 years. This year we have the 15th anniversary of Ideal, and we expect to have, I think, 850 or 900 million Ideal payments. It's globally it's huge even.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting, and so I think one of the things that you're also focused on related to this is sort of the potential risk around payment, right? So I think you do large campaigns against phishing, for example.
Yep.
We saw now also a report coming out again, warning for synthetic identity fraud, for example. Do you notice that in your surroundings there's also an increase in fraud, phishing, and other attempts to steal money, basically, not vote money?
Oh, absolutely. But for us, it's not yet the synthetic identity as biggest threat. I was on TV a couple of weeks ago in the consumer program Kassa. One of the big things we have on our hands today is what we call spoofing.
Yeah.
People falling victim to fraudsters that pretend to be their bank and say, "Oh, your money is at risk. You need to transfer to a separate secure account because some criminals from Ukraine are trying to access your account." Blah blah. Socially engineering the poor consumers in making the payments themselves.
Yeah.
Which means that the banks basically do not reimburse the people because they do it themselves, which is a very sorry thing because it's a very nasty scheme from the criminals. And there has been a motion in Parliament last week even. I'll be on Monday on Radar because it's very difficult to explain people how this can be. People mainly first fall victim to phishing. That's why the criminals get more details of their accounts, and which makes it more credible that the criminal that is calling is indeed somebody from the fraud department of your bank, because how else can they know what's on my statement? That's because they already fished those details, and then through social engineering, scaring people that their money is at risk, to transfer the money to secure deposit accounts, which of course are the money middle accounts of the criminals.
Yeah.
And then and these are really large sums of money that people are defrauded of, more so than what we call, I can't really officially not call it WhatsApp fraud, but that's one of the channels. It's a help fraud that you get through social media. You get a request, "Hi mom, I lost my phone. Can you please click on this link and pay me 300 euros, which is a very irritating, annoying sort of fraud. But those are, it's a multiplicity of the spoofing fraud, but it's many small amounts, whereas spoofing leads to fewer but very large amounts, which people really lose their life savings, and of course, which is a very, very sad thing.
No, I fully agree, and I think it's really sad that it works like this. And I would just want to comment on what you were saying about the fact that you can't really call it WhatsApp fraud, but the point is indeed that because WhatsApp is such a familiar social channel for people, that usually they talk to really close people. it really invades their personal space to a certain extent, right? So, and that's why it's really credible when you get a message there from someone claiming to be someone you know, to actually to help them out.
But it is so typically the scenario is, and of course the criminals they know also from social media that an elderly lady has a daughter in a certain age, and because the daughter posts stuff, hey, I'm on holiday wherever, they know so much, and they really socially engineer, and of course parents always want to help their children. So it's basically the scenarios. The criminal pretending to be the son or the daughter, having lost his or her phone or having a new number. Mom, help send money, or dad, help send money. And of course, would you do as parent? I would do it, probably.
Yeah, it's a really tough challenge. I think it's hard to overcome. But do you see now that, for example, the information that's being provided around this towards consumers, right? And so I mean, I think you focus a lot on education at this level. Do you see any fruits from that?
To be honest, not yet, and we are really thinking about how to intensify the communications here. Of course, banks try to educate their customers. What we are learning also from behavioral psychologists, it is not so much, and what you do see these victims, the people that fall victim to let's say spoofing, deep down they know they are that something is wrong, but they are step by step, they are talked into doing stuff they deep in their heart they do know that they shouldn't do, but still they do it. And it's this behavioral part. So it's not, and if you ask them after the fact, didn't you know that you shouldn't do this? Of course they knew they shouldn't do it, but it's so compelling, and these criminals, they take an hour, for instance, to keep talking to you and pretending, and then people start doubting, and step by step they are led to do ultimately what they're not supposed to do, is transfer the money themselves. And it's so devious, these scams, that the question now is, even so the basic message is, the only thing we can say as bank, the bank will never ask you to transfer money anywhere, never. That's the only basic. But everybody, of course, knows that, and still they do it. And how come that the knowledge part is not the problem? It's the behavioral part that people, even if they deep down know that something is wrong, they do stuff they shouldn't do. And so the challenge is how. So on the one hand, you need to educate for the facts, but that behavioral part is of course what the criminals exploit, and that is so incredibly difficult. And how do you do that? You can't do that in a mass media campaign. So we're trying to figure out what would be an even more effective way to help people, to make them more prepared for cyber criminals. And it's not going to get better. It's only going to get worse with the further digitalization.
And so do you see also a role there for technology to play a role, right? So I think, for example, if you talk about the protection of our computer hardware and software, we pretty much rely on virus scanners and firewalls and other protective measures, like we also just found out before the show started, that can be in the way of beautiful things as well. But I think it's interesting to see do you expect us to actually get more tools here? I think MasterCard launched a tool this week as well, CyberSecure, to also secure, or let's say identify frauds and keep payment infrastructure more secure. Or do you see other solutions that could potentially help us out here?
Yes, absolutely. But we have to realize, of course, and it's always, every analogy is, of course, goes wrong by the end of the day. But the locks on the front door, they are good enough. But if you give the key to the crooks, they can just open the door. So I think the hardware is not so much the problem. We have secure customer authentication. So on the hardware technology side, it's pretty safe. And this is what I just explained, spoofing. The criminals need to circumvent the hardcore security because they can't open the front door themselves. So they seduce the account holder to give the keys to them to open that door. And there's no way you can, from a security perspective, prevent the people from doing that. So the question then is, what can you do? And then probably you go more into artificial intelligence, machine learning to, once these criminals have gone through the front door, that through data analytics, etc., you can still detect it's not the customer itself, but there's a strange pattern. It takes so let's say the crook walks to the house in a different way than the account holder would do, but then you would need more machine learning AI to detect, wow, maybe it's not the account holder, him or herself, that's in the house, but it might be a crook.
Yeah.
So it's more on the data and the AI side. I believe that what we should be looking then, having more locks on the front door, because the criminals will find ways to seduce people through social engineering to hand them over not only one key but two keys and also three keys.
And so what do you think about, so one of the struggles that I have, I see a lot of phishing and fraud attempts come by, but I actually find it pretty hard to basically bring them to a channel so that knowledge becomes broadly available. So I think basically also sort of the reporting channels are also not completely optimal at the moment, because it's really hard to actually share with people what I see happening and how I think people should respond to these kind of messages, for example.
Okay, well, we have a very nice website as Payments Association, which is www.veiligbankieren.nl.
We'll share it in the comments on YouTube later, so people can rewatch that.
You can find it all there, but why but how do you get consumers to go there and to look at it? And we know our members are all doing what they should be doing on their websites and through their channels to their mobile apps, warning people, etc. But again, then you run the risk, if you warn too frequently, people just would click away like you click away cookies because they're annoying. I want to do a payment. I want to do this. Please go away with this nasty, with this annoying message. So it's extremely difficult to really channel that I believe.
Yeah. No.
But we have to do it.
No, exactly. But I think it's quite a tough challenge. But I think it's good that you've got this let's say this focus on it. And I think it's if we work on it together, I think both technology companies as well as sort of looking at it from an infrastructure perspective and trying to inform all the users to try how to keep it safe. Hopefully we'll be able to at least keep it to a relatively low number.
Because I think we should realize then it's not just a bank's problem; it's a social problem.
Yeah. No, exactly.
We all need to work together to fight criminals, and this is why we, for the spoofing thing, spoofing is made possible because I can pretend to use another person's phone number. I can pretend that I am the fraud desk of ING and showing their number to you while I am calling you. And so we also need to talk to these other players in the ecosystem, the telcos, for instance, in this case. Guys, we really need to make this technologically impossible because we as banks are dependent on that.
By the way, I think one good step was made, I think also this week. I think the Dutch police has caught one of the software builders for a lot of these phishing campaigns, right?
Great.
I thought it was quite a nice win as well. And because indeed, let's say there's a lot of tools available also on the criminal side that allows people to just become a criminal for free, basically, and just to take a chance at making some extra money, which I think is, of course, also something that we should be fighting on at the same time.
If you have criminal intent, you can go to the dark web and you can buy all the components you need to set up a spoofing attack or a DDoS attack or
don't tell them, Gijs. Don't tell them. All right. I fully agree. But I think it's a really important topic that we keep on talking about is how to keep the whole ecosystem safe. So and at the same time, we're also already running out of time, Gijs. So I'm not sure if there's any last thing that you would like to share, what you're working on or what people should be looking out for.
Well, as I read for frauds, the bank will never ask you to transfer your money anywhere. It will always be criminals. And if you stick to that simple truth, that's the best chance to stay clean from fraudsters. But it is difficult. And the second is, it is like fighting the COVID-19 virus, the criminals. We can only be successful if we do it together with all actors and with the government, the police, the customers, the banks. Everybody in the ecosystem needs to cooperate. And to try to fight them, and it will never go away. We know that
Yeah.
too.
No, I of course, criminals will always find a way to find a new loophole where they are able to take advantage of things, and we're just gonna have to figure out how to patch the hole as soon as possible. But it's great that we could work together on that, Gijs, and I really enjoyed our talk today this morning as well. I hope you liked it.
Okay, yes, I'm sure I surely did, Don. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, no, so it was nice to talk to you. We'll catch up again sometime soon. Hopefully, at some point again with a beer in a friendly environment. But let's first sit out the COVID period like this. So thanks again, Gijs, very much for joining me this morning. It was a lot of fun.
Okay, see you.
Thanks, and everyone for listening in. Thank you very much as well. We'll put the links, as were mentioned, with the data from the Dutch Payment Association, as well as the Safe Banking website. We'll put the links out so you can track them out. So thank you all for listening in, and looking forward to talk to you again next week. Have a great weekend.